So, kicking us off is Brian Carpenter from Southwest Heritage Trust, the Devon Archives and Local Studies Service. This talk used to be called A Day in the Life of an Archivist and was developed during lockdown. It's now become a day in the life of an outreach archivist because Brian's allowed out again.
Well, that's more or less true.
Yeah, exactly.
But I will be issuing an apology to anybody who was expecting it to just be about an archivist. But
fair enough.
That's no problem.
So if you did hear this talk when it was done online last year, wasn't it? We did this one, I think, when we did our Zoom-based event. Don't worry, it has changed a bit since last year. It's not the same talk at all.
Well, actually, Mike, it wasn't part of your day last year. It was part of an event that we ran for Explore Your Archive, which is a national archive awareness campaign, which always goes on towards the end of November. So actually, it had people attending from all over the country and possibly outside, but it hasn't been seen before here. So
excellent. And
probably
now
will be fresh to most people.
Okay, Brian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, the first thing to say is, having last been here at the last physical local history day here 3 years ago, it's very good to be back because, as Mark knows, and as some of you would no doubt know as you would have attended it, there were 2 online-only local history days last year and the year before, which I think worked very well, but it is nice to be back in person and in front of a physical audience, because I think that it just makes the interaction a lot better and it's easy to ask and answer questions and so on. The other thing to say at the start is that although there's a bit of a vogue for this at the moment, I'm not going to be resigning my job this morning. I'm going to be talking to you about my job. And the third thing to say, and Mark's already touched on this, is that I'm going to be talking about my current role, which is primarily working on outreach, or what is generally known as outreach in the archive world, which is doing things like this, giving talks, showing groups around the office, developing projects with external organisations and groups and so on. So I'll talk about that as we go through. So to start with, about me, the general pattern for people who work in archives is to do a degree first. Certainly in the past that tended to be in history and related subjects, often classics. That's changed a little bit, I think, over the years, but I studied history and politics at the University of Warwick, and then studied for a postgraduate diploma in archive administration at University College London in 1990, and then came to work at the what I tend to refer to now as the old Devon Record Office in early 1991, which does seem a very long time ago now, and it seems hard to compute the fact that I've been working in my role for just over 30 years, which it does take a little bit of getting used to. But as people may know, the original Devon Record Office, which I came to work in, was founded in the early 1950s as part of a movement to develop county record offices throughout England and Wales, which started initially between the wars and then really developed pace after the Second World War. So we were part of that. And when I began work at the record office, and I would imagine that some of you may have visited the old record office. We were based in the old City Library building in the centre of Exeter, which, along with quite a number of other buildings around Exeter, has been turned into student flats in recent years. But that was good as a location because it was central. It was in the centre of the city, and that worked in lots of ways. But it was really inadequate for the purpose we were putting it to, because it wasn't big enough to take all the documents that we hold, and it wasn't really busy enough to accommodate all the people who were using us then, because we were, for a period of time in the late 90s and early 2000s, really extremely busy. And so as time went on, it became more and more clear that we had to find newer and better premises. The other thing about the position of the old record office was that, as I said, we couldn't fit all the documents we hold into the building, and so the majority of them were in an old carpet warehouse at Marsh Barton, which had never been designed to hold archives. And there were all kinds of problems there with roofs leaking and so on. And so it was really necessary for us to find better accommodation. So we were lucky enough to get a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund in the early 2000s, at a time when they were giving out a lot of money to record offices throughout the country to upgrade their facilities. And that's what led to the conversion of Greatmore House to the current record office, which later became the Heritage Centre. And we moved into Greatmore House in 2005. For most of my first 20 or so years in the office, I had what might be described as a fairly typical general archivist role, answering remote inquiries, and of course in the early days those were all by letter before we moved into the era of email. Cataloguing documents, accessioning new collections, and working in the search room with the public. But in 2011 we went through a major restructuring, really in response to the sort of cuts in local government funding and staffing that were going on at that time, which we certainly couldn't avoid. And I assumed chief responsibilities, as I've said, for community and outreach work, which I've been doing ever since. The other thing to say about the development of the record office through that period was the fact that in 2014 we amalgamated essentially with the West Country Studies Library, which stayed in the City Library building in the centre of Exeter after we left, and then their material was moved out to us in 2014. And that's when we became the Devon Heritage Centre, because we moved from just having responsibility for manuscript items to having printed material as well, because the function of the West Country Studies Library collection is holding printed material, so all kinds of books about the county, from novels through local history material. And in fact, as many of you may know, it isn't just Devon, it covers the whole of the West Country. There's material relating to Dorset, Somerset, Cornwall, and even up as far as Bath and Bristol. So, and then there are newspapers in the West Country Studies collection as well. So that really enhanced our holdings and allowed us to offer a wider range of material. And then in late 2014, again as a way of keeping not keeping the centre going, because we were never in danger of ceasing to exist, but certainly as a way of mitigating further staff cuts, we became part of a trust, the South West Heritage Trust, with the Somerset Archives and Local Studies Service, and the trust also includes museums and the Historic Environment Service in Somerset, which is essentially the archaeology service in Somerset. And we get our funding jointly from Devon County Council, Somerset County Council, Torbay Council and North Somerset Council. And overall I think that's been beneficial in terms of developing the service, and also giving us, I would say, more autonomy from the county council. And before 2014 we were a very small cog in a very large organisation. Now we have more opportunities to take independent decisions and do things more quickly. So I think that overall that's been beneficial. I'll start by talking a little bit about how outreach was when I started working in archives. And it's actually quite an unusual thing to be standing here and talking to an audience at 20 to 10 in the morning, because more often than not one does this sort of thing out in village halls in the evening, and you've got the challenge of finding the place, and both the audience and the speaker staying awake and so on. So it's a novelty to be standing here in the morning and speaking. But so when I started, the staple of outreach work, which in general was much more limited than it is now, was giving talks in places like village halls, as I've said, often to general audiences such as women's institutes or Rotary clubs. That was really the traditional way in which record offices spread the word about what they did. A change, I think, over the period that I've been doing it has been the fact that there are more. I think there's probably generally more interest in local history and more structured interest, because I think there are more societies around now than there were when I started, and so more often you're speaking to what you might call slightly more specialist audiences with particular interest in particular areas, which has made it, I think, generally more enjoyable to do, because when one gives talks to particular areas, you have an opportunity to tailor it to people's interest, cover a wider range of sources. And the sort of talks we used to do were more about the work of the office, which obviously you always touch on, but that could feel a little bit uninspiring. So that is a way in which it has developed in over the years, and as I've touched upon. Yeah, it's still the case that when one does those, and obviously in recent years there's been a reduction in talks because of the pandemic, and we're just starting to get those going. This is probably I say the second talk I've really given since before the pandemic. Yes, the talks tend to be in the evenings, often in far-flung places with the attendant problem of getting lost and things like that, and the various stories I could tell about going to places in as I say, far-flung parts of Devon, and having trouble finding the building or finding my way back. So yeah, that's something that's always a potential issue. And of course, in the early days, we were using old-fashioned projectors with slides. No PowerPoint as I'm using this morning, which is obviously a tremendous advantage in all kinds of ways. So that's another way in which we've moved on. We did do exhibitions in those days. In fact, that's probably slightly. Those were things that we did slightly more of than we do now. Those were more often not staged in village halls, sometimes in churches. In a lot of cases, and this is still something that one has to be aware of when one does that sort of thing. There are obvious security issues and the possibility of original documents being damaged or having, well, in a worst case scenario, having things like coffee spilled on them, which obviously one takes, well, in my case, very, very stringent measures to avoid. But there are always complications around taking original documents out, although that's something that we've been doing slightly more of in recent years in different ways, really through the trust, because we've staged a couple of quite big exhibitions of original documents at venues in Somerset and Devon during the period the trust's been in operation. I'll say a bit more about that and mention and show some photos of those exhibitions later on. And now we still give physical talks, which, as I say, is they're just getting underway again now after the pandemic. But we have moved into to giving online talks. I've certainly given one at this event while it was held online. and we've also staged a series of larger events through the trust itself. In 2021, we had a series of online events which we called lockdown lectures, featuring well-known historians or popular subjects, including Professor Ron Hutton of Bristol University, who spoke about the myths and legends surrounding Glastonbury, and Ian Mortimer, a well-known historical author who lives locally, who in fact is a former colleague of mine in my early days at the Record Office, who spoke about his latest book. So those have been very successful in raising the profile of the trust, and as I mentioned earlier, those have attracted people from all over the world to them, which gives my role and our role an international dimension, which well, we did have in the early days, because we always had visitors from abroad coming to use us to do physical research, but being able to reach people in that way has been a fantastic advantage of developing this sort of thing online. So that's really quite an exciting thing to be part of. And we're also, well, during this year, we've been staging one online talk each month as part of a series we've called Coffee Time Talks, and those have been going on generally on the third Friday of each month during the year. The next one is next week, I think. A colleague of mine from Somerset talking about travel diaries held in the Somerset Heritage Centre. So again, we're developing them close to home. Again, as I mentioned, when we do hold exhibitions now, they're tending to be larger or more ambitious, and I'll show some photographs later on of a couple of exhibitions we did a few years ago of original documents in really excellent venues in Somerset and Devon, but also something we're just moving into is looking at displaying material online as essentially online exhibitions, which are well, in some ways easier to develop, although there's quite a bit of technical work involved in it. That's something that the museums in Somerset have done quite a bit of, and something that we're going to look at developing as part of our work as the archive service over the next year or so. So that those will be worth keeping an eye out for. They'll be available via our website as they develop. Something else I do a lot of, which again has really resumed this year after the pandemic, is tours of the Heritage Centre, which actually I think probably understandably over recent years have become more popular than talks. We tend to be asked to go out and give fewer talks, but people are more interested in coming in and seeing what we have to offer in the centre, and I do the majority of those and really enjoy them because people appreciate the opportunity to see behind the scenes, because there are a lot of areas at the Heritage Centre that members of the public using the centre to research wouldn't normally see, such as obviously the areas where we store the documents, and also the areas where conservation work goes on, where people work on new collections of documents and so on. So those work very well. I enjoy doing them, and they're a really excellent way of promoting the service, and in a lot of cases I think people can have slightly exaggerated ideas about the difficulty of using records and the difficulty of using an office like ourselves in terms of being concerned about procedures and rules and so on. So it's an opportunity to explain the rules and how things work, and that can be very useful in terms of setting people's mind at rest before they come in to actually use us to do research. So those work extremely well. And if anybody wants to book one on behalf of a group, then you can see me after the talk. And then also in recent years, and this is probably something that's been developed a little bit more through being part of the trust, is research projects involving volunteers, and probably the best example of that over the last decade or so was the Devon Remembers Heritage Project, which was a project run to coincide with the centenary of the First World War between 2015 and 2019. That was based on, again, lottery funding, which gave us the opportunity to develop and act as a hub for research projects throughout the county into the specifically the home front, what was going on in Devon during the First World War, and that led to a lot of very, very good research and events connected to that. So that's another way of, I suppose, acting as the focus for research going on throughout the county and what particular groups are doing. And then also having larger premises has enabled us to hold larger events, so conferences often in connection with research projects like the Devon Remembers Heritage Project, open days where we talk generally about what we do and what other similar organisations do, and then celebration events and training sessions, some of which I'll say more about as we go along. And then another aspect is what you might term digital engagement through websites and social media. And as I've said, obviously there's information about the services we provide on our website, but we're working on moving towards having things like online exhibitions and we're, well, it's a slow process and it's something that people always ask about, but there is a certain amount of digitised material available online, actually usually on websites other than our own, in the sense that certain people here will certainly know about these. The two main areas of our holdings that we've had digitised are tithe maps for the county, which are available on a couple of websites, Know Your Place and the Devon Historic Environment Service website, and then the vast majority of our parish registers have been digitised as well, and they're available on the Find My Past website, which is one of the two main genealogical websites, and that's subscription only elsewhere, but within the Heritage Centre that's available free of charge, so that's another incentive to visit us. I think as time goes on, well, we are digitising material on a regular basis, but generally it's just in response to individual demands for digital copies of documents. And obviously we're developing a library of digital material, but the really big projects such as digitising the tithe maps and parish registers have had to be done by outside organisations, and for lots of reasons that's a difficult thing to develop, both in terms of the cost and planning and so on. So I think as time goes on we will do more digitisation, and potentially more documents will be available online, probably through the means of digital exhibitions, as I mentioned, and so on. But yeah, that's very much a long-term thing to develop. So, as I mentioned, exhibitions. In the early days of the trust, we ran several large exhibitions of original documents, and this was one that was particularly enjoyable and really good to be involved with. Something that I know through being involved in all kinds of events and publications and so on over many years is that people always like maps, and we ran an exhibition of maps of Devon and Somerset in or two venues. This particular one running two venues on consecutive weeks or within a fortnight. Firstly, at the Guildhall in Exeter, which for anybody who's been in there will know is a wonderful historic building and a tremendous venue for this sort of thing. And then we basically ran the same exhibition in Wells Town Hall a week or two later. Very, very well attended, and those sorts of things are a step on from people coming to us to do their own individual research, in that they will attract people who are not aware of what we do, who haven't done research but are just interested in history, and are often, I think, really astounded by what survives and what we have. And as I say, in connection with all kinds of things, one always knows that people are interested in maps. And again, in the early days of the trust, we ran a couple of exhibitions of. We had the idea of having an exhibition in Devon of Devon documents held in Somerset, and then we held an exhibition in Somerset. Devon was in the Guildhall again, and in Somerset it was in St James's Church in Taunton. In Taunton we had an exhibition of Somerset documents held in Devon. So that was a way of developing the trust concept and showing that there's someone serving the two counties. We haven't done so much of this sort of thing in recent years, and as I've said, I think we're probably moving slightly more towards looking at online exhibitions as a way of developing knowledge of our holdings, but this sort of thing is very enjoyable to be involved in, although certainly hard work and time consuming, and so it would be nice to do something like this again at some stage, but we'll see how that develops. Tours, again, as I've mentioned, a picture of a particular tour. Usually I'm actually leading the tour, so I don't have an opportunity to take any photographs, but that's a photograph taken in the conservation studio at the Devon Heritage Centre, which I know at least one person in the audience today is very familiar with, because they've worked in there, and that's our former senior conservator Deborah Phillips talking to people about the process of physically conserving documents, which again is something that people probably have a general idea goes on, but don't know about the processes involved and the work connected with it. So that's always an element of that that's of interest. And as you'll note, that was a tour we gave to the Exeter Deaf Heritage Club, which illustrates potentially the diverse range of groups that tours can cover. We're very much open to all, and as I say, those tours have become increasingly popular over recent years. As I've said, obviously we didn't do any during the pandemic, and for large periods we were closed to the public anyway, so we couldn't do them. But those have started up again this year. I've done several this year, and those are always very well received. And then going back to what I was saying earlier, because of the size of the building now and the quality of the facilities, we can run larger events where we can obviously host people giving talks about particular aspects of projects or material we hold, and display documents at the same time. And this was an event to, as it says, celebrate a conservation project we ran to conserve the papers of Viscount Sidmouth, which are probably the best historic political collection that we hold. First Viscount Sidmouth, Henry Addington, was Prime Minister from 1801 to 1804, and Home Secretary from 1812 to 1822, and in 2017 received a grant from the National Manuscripts Conservation Trust to conserve the political papers as part of the collection, which includes a very large amount of correspondence to and from very, very important figures of the period. So, as I say, this is an example of the sort of thing that, because of the larger size of the area available to us, we can do more of and do better than we could in the past. So again, it's a product of the nature of things that most of the pictures of events that you see here will be from before the pandemic, because obviously we haven't done anything like this since the pandemic, but hopefully if things settle down as time goes on, we will be doing more events of this sort as projects and ideas come up. Another similar event was again in 2019. We signed a memorandum of understanding with Next University, which has already led to the development of some interesting projects, one of which I'll come to. So that was another event we ran in the research room. And then we can, as a step on from general tours, we can offer more specific training sessions where people can look at original documents and learn more about how to use them. And this is unique in terms of this talk, in that it's a photograph of a session that's actually only taken place in the last couple of months. We've for a long time had quite a good relationship with the Devon Gardens Trust, which exists to maintain gardens and study the history of gardens in the county. We hold a lot of their research material. And in May I hosted a group from the Devon Gardens Trust looking at the ways in which maps in particular can be used to trace the history of gardens. So again, that's a slightly different thing to the general tours we do, but it's a really good way of introducing people and groups to specific items and the ways in which they can be used. Something to say around that, which is worth bearing in mind, is that people may know that well, during the pandemic we were completely closed for a period of time, but we're now only opening on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. We haven't opened on Mondays for a number of years before the pandemic. We're not going to be reopening on Fridays, but we're using Fridays as a particular day to do this sort of thing. So we've got a specific dedicated day for hosting tours, running events, and so on. So that's something that we would, as I say, be looking to develop more of as hopefully we move on from the pandemic. And that's another one for volunteers involved with the Exeter City Football Club Museum, which was developing at the time. We ran a few sessions for them with a number of people who were a number of student interns that they had from the university at that time. So that was another example of a training session. And then coming back to what I was saying earlier about the lockdown lectures we ran online last year, a couple of examples of those from our website, and as I said earlier, those it's quite a nice thing to feel that your the work and what you're presenting is accessible to people internationally, and to run that sort of thing and know that there are people from all kinds of parts of the world logging on. People would know that there's always been a lot of interest in understandably, family history and local history to a certain extent through people whose ancestors emigrated from Britain, so you do tend to get quite a few people from Australia and the States logging on to online talks. So yeah, those are really good, and I think in future we'll only be doing more of those as both the technology and our ability to use it develops.
Are those still online?
Those I don't think are, but I could check on that.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I may get a chance to drop a line to somebody today and find out. And those particular ones were, as you can see, over a year ago now. So I would doubt it, but they were online for a period of time afterwards. So they might just be somewhere. But I'll check on that. And then another aspect of what I do is overall, or looking after volunteers in overall terms, and something which we've benefited from tremendously over a long period of time is involvement of volunteers in the work that we do, and there are lots of projects and aspects of our work which simply couldn't have developed as they have, or in fact probably developed at all over the last 10 or more years without the assistance of volunteers, because we simply haven't had the full-time staff to run them in the same way. So here we've got examples of people working on various things. In particular, we've had a project going on for many years to catalogue some of our historic Quarter Sessions records, which are records of the Quarter Sessions courts, which we hold from the late 16th century up to when the Quarter Sessions courts ceased to exist in 1971, and so an ongoing project involving a volunteer who's a retired archivist cataloguing the documents, and other volunteers cleaning them and preparing them to be catalogued. So that's been a team effort essentially, and as I say, without we had some initial funding to run that project, and initially we had an archivist employed to do it, but without the voluntary help we've had, we couldn't have continued running that as we have. So that's been extremely important. And, again, we couldn't have any volunteers in during the main part of the pandemic, but that's starting to pick up again in a number of existing volunteers have come back over this year, and I think in time we'll welcome more back, but that has to be tailored around everything else we're doing. So that is another really good aspect of what we do, and the types of volunteer can vary. I'd say the majority of volunteers are retired people who are looking to do something interesting and give something to the community, but we also have had regular volunteers who are more often than not either undergraduate or postgraduate students at one of the local universities who are thinking about careers in heritage. So we've had a number of volunteers who've gone on to do postgraduate archive courses, or work in museums, and that's another really beneficial aspect of doing what we do to introduce people to what we do, and give them the opportunity to acquire skills that can help them progress. So yeah, another important element of what I do. I mentioned at the start that we receive a certain amount of funding from Torbay Council, and something we've been doing over recent years is looking to develop our services there. And since 2019, I've been going to Tor Abbey 4 times a year with original documents to help people with research down there, and in many cases people are reluctant to, or may find it difficult to travel to Exeter to come to the Heritage Centre. So it's all about taking documents to the people really, and it's a very very nice venue to work at, and there have obviously been some fluctuations in how often I've been there during the pandemic, but that's something I really enjoy doing. And we've also been running some other projects, or one other particular project in Torquay, which I go on to mention. This was something that came out of the memorandum of understanding with the university, that in late 2020 we were approached by the university with an offer of funding to assist in the creation of a piece of digital work to reach an audience which we previously found hard to engage with, and in consultation with the university we developed the idea of working with two primary schools in Torquay to develop a website and a mobile app which would enable pupils to discover more about notable people with links to Torquay. So we developed that in conjunction with an IT consultant who really built the website and the app, and what it consists of is a trail around Torquay, which, as I say, it was originally aimed at primary school pupils, and classes at the two schools that we were connected to have followed it, but really anybody can follow, and it features notable people, some of whose names you may be able to pick out there, with particular links with Torquay, the most famous of which is probably Agatha Christie, but also Isambard Kingdom, Brunel, Rudyard Kipling, who else? Various people who would be less well known, or their connections with Torquay would be less well known, such as Haile Selassie, who briefly lived in Torquay during his exile, and also a remarkable woman called Eileen Nairn, who worked for the Secret Intelligence Service behind enemy lines in France during the Second World War, who later retired to Torquay, and so the trail features places that these people were associated with, where they lived, where they were born, and so on, but also documents from our collections, but that relate to the particular people. And we, earlier this year, we were delighted to hear that the trail had received something called the Alan Ball Award, which is part of a series of awards given to local history publications and material, and this received the Alan Ball Award for the best or the outstanding local history electronic publication of 2021, and this has given us ideas for further similar work, and we're going to be looking to develop something similar in and around Barnstaple later on this year, which I'll also be involved with. So there will be more of that. And then other recent projects, some of you may be aware of or have worked with the Devon History Society's Devon in the 1920s project, which is really a research project which was designed by, or the idea from the people behind it was to follow on from the Devon Remembers Heritage project in terms of looking at what was going on in Devon during the 1920s, obviously following the First World War. And an aspect of that we looked to develop was making a DVD for circulation to care homes throughout the county about some particular aspects of life in Devon during the 1920s. And I was involved in the making of that last year, and will appear on the DVD, and that was very interesting, both in terms of the process of being involved for myself, because I'd never done any work of that sort before, but also looking at a different way of reaching a different audience. So that's something that, again, I think we would like to repeat, but you've got the usual questions around how you develop that funding and so on. But that's been that was a really interesting thing to be involved in, and something that we would like to develop more in the future. And then, sorry, yeah, sure. This is the last slide actually. The Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project is a wider project run by the British Library to digitise sound archive material throughout the UK, and we've had a member of staff appointed as part of that to work on exactly that, digitising sound archive material, because over the years we've taken in large amounts of recorded material in all kinds of formats, from old-fashioned open reel tapes up to, well, video material as well, video cassettes and so on, and the process of converting that to a format that can be easily accessed and continue to be being used in the future. Some people always got the questions around future-proofing and developing technology and so on is a highly technical process. We've had somebody involved in that, so it's another way of developing access really to our holdings as time goes on. So that's given you a general and very quick rundown of what I do and a range of things that we've been involved with in the past, particularly over the last few years, and giving you an idea of the way in which outreach work has expanded over the period of time that I've been involved in it. And I think it's fair to say, well, I think I've probably got the most interesting job in the office in terms of the fact it's the most varied job, and there's been a lot of aspects of what we do that I've got involved in recent years, such as the films, for example, that have been completely new and very enjoyable things to be involved in. So and going forward, hopefully if things settle down on the COVID front, we'll be doing more. So I look forward to it, and maybe able to give you an update at a future local history day here. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brian.
And the other thing to say, I don't know how tight we are for time, is that I'll be here all day, so I can answer any questions there.
Yeah, we won't take questions now because we've got about 10 minutes to turn around before the next talk. But yeah, as Brian says, he'll be here all day and is on the table over there between Tiverton Museum and the Devon Family History Society, so do catch Brian. We have a longer break between talks 3 and 4 for lunch, but we will still be open during that period. So, you know, there's an hour's lunch break, but there'll also be an opportunity to chat to people within that time too. Thank you. That's what I said. The Sound Heritage project with the British Library is a great project, and it's coming up with some really good stuff in terms of dialect as much as anything else.
Yeah, of course, we ran that online dialect session, which went really well. Yeah, I was really surprised by the interest in that. So, yeah, with all these things, there's more to say. So if you've got any questions,